Okay, good afternoon everyone. Lovely to see you all. A bit of housekeeping as always. We're not expecting an alarm. If there is an alarm, please could we meet outside in the square under the Queen Victoria statue. And if you are a member of the public, of which there are none, then if you did sign in, make sure you sign out when you leave later on. There is live web streaming, so as always, please be aware, and that's done from the camera at the back. Again, if there were members of the public here, it's mainly for their benefit, but there are not. So we are the live stars of today's meeting/show. Please make sure you use the microphones as always to make sure that when it is recorded, people in 20 years' time will be able to listen with absolute earnest to the meeting's procedures. Okay, please turn over the page. There are no deputations received, and we've had apologies from Councillor Vernon Jackson, and Councillor Stagg is here in his place, from Councillor Donna Jones, and Councillor Luke Stubbs is here in her place, and Councillor Matthew Atkins and Councillor Linda Symes is here in his place, and from David Williams, the Chief Executive. But we have perfectly capable people, so we don't need him today. Okay, could we just go round and say who we are very quickly, in case there is a ever-growing audience at home?
I'm Councillor Darren Sanders. I'm a councillor for Baffin's Ward.
Councillor Lynn Stagg, also Baffin's Ward.
Cal Corkery, councillor for Charles Dickens Ward.
Linda Symes, councillor for Eastern and Cranes Ward.
Luke Stubbs, Eastern and Cranes Ward.
Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Services.
Rochelle Nella, Human Resources.
Peter Bolf, City Solicitor.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Thank you, and I should have said my name is Ben Dowling. I'm a councillor for Milton Ward and chair of this committee. Okay, item 1, any members' interest that we need to declare other than the standing items? No. Okay, wonderful. We've already done apologies for absence. Sorry, I did it in the wrong order. Minutes of the last meeting. Are we happy with the minutes? Anybody want to complain or correct, edit? No. Blank faces. Wonderful. We'll take those as correct. Thank you. Item 4, sickness absence quarterly report. Rochelle?
So this is the quarterly report. Obviously we missed a quarter because Employment Committee was cancelled due to the election in December, so this is the relevant data. Members asked for us to try and gain some comparative data to bring to the committee. That proved to be far more challenging than we had anticipated because most councils were busy preparing for the election and not particularly willing to humour us with their absence data. We also found that there's a huge discrepancy in how organisations record their absence data and therefore report, including issues around legacy data, so when people leave, how long that data is in there. So the data is limited, but we haven't given you the data on the services that you requested in terms of adults and children's social care. So that's the first thing that members requested. You also requested consideration be given to a potential new corporate target because 7 days had been used some time ago and whether that was still relevant. So I've given you some information in terms of the latest local government report, which indicates the average across the public sector is 8.8 days, so again for members to consider a new corporate target for the organisation. In terms of the data itself, average days has increased quite slightly. That's not unusual for the time of the year that this report's gone over. We've just been over a very busy Christmas period and the normal cough, cold, flus, viruses. We've run the same data again this week and we have seen that trend started to go down, so I hope to have some more positive news at the next Employment Committee. In terms of the current target, 9 of the directorates are above the current corporate target of 7 days. That would reduce to 6 if the target was increased to the 8.8 figure or 9 days. I've also given you some information because it's a growing area that we're developing in terms of wellbeing campaigns and what we're doing to try and enable people to improve their own health. And since we've last seen you, we've run campaigns and we piggyback on national agendas, obviously, to try and gain the most profile with the least cost but big impact. So we've had suicide prevention awareness, mental health awareness, Stoptober, menopause awareness campaign that we ran in conjunction with our trade union colleagues, Dry January and the flu vaccinations. We've now had over 106 managers attended the mental health awareness training, which is really positive. It was something that members had asked us to focus on, and we've got 2 more sessions commissioned that are fully booked, and we have a waiting list, so that's something that we will look to continue, and also to train our own mental health first aid workers across the organisation. We've also now got 24 wellbeing champions, and that's across the whole entire organisation now, so each directorate has one at least in each of the services, and they are responsible for promoting the campaigns that we've got and being that champion within the specific service area. So an area that's working really well is the port. It was traditionally an area we've struggled to get involved in terms of wellbeing, and they've now got some wellbeing champions. I've also given you a little bit of data, and it because we're able to provide it now because we have a new system, looking at the correlation between age and absences and the area, because that was something we touched on at the last committee. And we do see an increase in absences related to cancer, musculoskeletal and heart disorders as age increases. Obviously, these issues are quite difficult for us to prevent and therefore manage a return to work quicker. We are obviously there to provide support. So what that's enabled us to do is have a look and see where we should be focusing our resources and to the absences that we can perhaps prevent, shorten and get people back to work quicker, whilst allowing managers to support those staff with the longer term conditions. So as our data improves, it will enable us to focus on specific pockets of the organisation where we can be most effective. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Or we'll take questions and comments at the same time. Cal, followed by Luke.
Thank you. I can see now in Appendix 3 that work-related psychological stress, anxiety and depression is now recorded separately from general stress, anxiety and depression, which is something that we'd asked for previously, so thank you for that. It seems to me that the number is quite low relative to the work-related figure is quite low relative to the more general description, which potentially is a good thing if it means not lots of people are going off with work-related stress. But having been a union rep in a large organisation, it doesn't seem right to me. So I do wonder, it would be useful to get a better understanding of how that is recorded. And whether there's potentially any risk that there's under-reporting or miscategorisation.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you're right, that is a very low figure. It's legacy issues, so the category was only introduced in the tail end of last year. So what we haven't been able to do is go back over the whole year and recategorise all the data. What we've been doing is working with open cases, requesting the permission of the individual who is absent to recategorise their absence, and all new cases moving forward from September will be categorised appropriately, so the individual will get to see the reason for the absence. So it's not a positive, but I expect that figure to go up, but it will be positive in terms of us having a truer reflection of the reason for the absence. So that's just a historical legacy.
So going forward, how does that categorisation take place? Is it if the employee declares themselves that it's work-related, or is it the line manager's decision or GP sick note, or how does that play out?
It would be for if the medical fit note says work-related, it will be recorded automatically. If not, it will be a conversation with the individual, and individuals have access to be able to see the reason recorded for their own absence reason. So if they disagree with that, they can escalate that to us. So it's a very transparent process. It also can change. You've been working as a trade union rep, you'll know that. So we can start off with a non-work related, or we can start off with a work related and change part way through. So that dialogue's constant and open.
Thank you, Councillor Stubbs.
This 8.8 figure for local government, what do we know about where that came from? So, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, I know it says LGA, but I mean, obviously there's quite a mix of local authority types, and if you took the average of a district council and a county council, well, that kind of isn't really a fair way of averaging it. So are we comparing like with like? Because the fact that there's, more than 2 extra days absence here as opposed to the local authority average is, it's not good. But the question I have really is, do you have any further information about comparable councils, and does this take into account the size of the workforce the authorities have?
In terms of the response, it's the latest LGA report, and it covers, as I say in the report, 174 councils. That will be a mix of district, boroughs and county councils as well, because that's the areas that they look at. In terms of comparative data, the only data we've received that we can use as comparators are the ones that are in the other appendix, and I've included the organisational average. It's extremely difficult to get data from other organisations. If being completely honest, we had to put in an FOI request to most other local authorities to get some of the data. And the way that people report on the data isn't consistent with each authority, so it does differ. We can certainly look into that further if you're not happy with that information. That was the best we could do. All of the other data is so out of date. It was at least 2 years old. That was the most recent data that we could find in relation to the public sector.
Yes, I mean, even if we had average, I mean, I wouldn't be all that happy with that. But what I don't know is, do we have something to worry about? Are we doing particularly badly? Because you put information in front of us to say, well, we are 2.2 days lost more per year than the average. But I just want to clarify in my mind that that is a fair comparison, because if it is, then we've got a difficulty that needs to be looked at.
I don't think we've particularly got an issue. We'll come back to the data. I think also the difficulty of the type of the workforce that other local authorities have in-house and externally, that has an impact on the absence figures as well. So when we were trying to look at, for example, comparators for adult social care, it depends what makes up adult social care as a directorate. When you look at the whole organisation, that does. So some people have contracts internally, some externally. So that our grounds maintenance, we have that internally. Other local authorities have that externally, so that wouldn't be included in the data. So we could perhaps try and work with some of our closest neighbours. Brighton and Hove are a similar size, similar makeup, which I've given you. I wouldn't say that we've particularly got anything significantly to worry about. Whilst I'm at the heads of HR meetings with other colleagues, we're not out of kilter.
One of the other things I'm looking at here, on their final appendix, so it doesn't seem to have a letter on it, but where you have the absence analysis, I'm a bit confused as to what that means. So you've got a ratio, you've got a list of different age ranges, and they're all, 2 point something to 1. So what's 1? What are you comparing that against? I'm unclear.
So that's all of the absence for that age bracket, and so the absence across that age range, so 50 to 50.
Compared to what? 3 to 1, what's 1? What are you comparing it against?
Oh, sorry, let me have a look.
Can you direct us at what page?
Yeah, I think it's this one.
2 and the name on the online document at the top.
I believe that's the average figure, but I would have to come back on you to you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to make sense of this other graph, which shows the number of days lost. But then you can't really tell what that means without knowing, the age of the workforce and how that splits down. And I'm imagining that this is some attempt at answering that question, but I don't understand what it means when you say 2.2 to 1. What's that supposed to mean?
It's essentially 1 in 3 people within that age bracket, so that's the ratio breakdown. So within that age bracket, the number of people who are absent, it's 1 in 3. Yeah.
Really? So, I'm still confused. So you're saying a third of the workforce have a day off in the year?
Within each age bracket, that's the number within each age bracket, yes.
I'm still very unclear about that, because it's expressed as a ratio. I'm not at all clear what that means. Let's try another approach. So you've got here these graphs, this graph with bars of varying heights, which shows that the number of days lost in total really ramps up in the 45 to 49 age range and stays there for the subsequent ones up to the standard retirement age. How does that compare with the the shape of the workforce, the age distribution of the workforce, are we finding that we've got a lot more days absent? I mean, I'd expect more days absence from older people. Guess I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. Is it very greater? How much more?
We are currently doing some analysis on the workforce profile, which wasn't available for this report, which, when it's finished, I'm very happy to circulate. But the early indications is that our workforce profile is on average older in range than younger. So we've got a higher proportion of the workforce in those age ranges than in younger age ranges. So when we say 1 in 3 people who are 50 and above are more frequently absent, that also is therefore a higher proportion of the workforce, because a higher proportion of the workforce is in that age range. But once that workforce profile information is available, I'm very happy to circulate it.
I think through you, Chairman, that it would be useful to have that information, because we've got breakdowns by these booking codes, but I also think it would be useful, and by department, but since these numbers are high and seem to have risen since I last saw it, and I don't sit in this committee anymore, so I don't automatically see these, but the numbers are up, and so I'm just trying to get whatever information I can on why that might be.
Yeah, I think I agree, Councillor, so if that could be circulated when in a format that we can digest, I think that would be really helpful, because it's putting data into context is the key thing here. Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Ben. We've got another report which is around equal pay, which actually has a whole raft of numbers which are separate, which are done by actual figures as opposed to percentages, and the workforce does increase significantly, particularly in the part-time aspect of it, once you get over 40, and then accelerates even further once we get to 50. So yes, we've got a much older workforce. But just before my own questions, just on Luke's point, you say it's about a third, but what's not clear to me is whether the total number of days are about a third, and so it's just an average, or whether 1 in every 3rd person who is over 50 takes a day off sick a year. Which one is it?
It would be as an average.
So it's an average. So it's
average,
not like every single third. So you're including long-term sickness absence and stuff like that, because if you didn't, that would be very scary. So that's a bit better. I mean, trying to take these things forward is going to be difficult. Firstly, coronavirus may or may not affect anybody, and so that may or may not skew things. Secondly, Luke's point is a fair one, in that the only comparators we've got are key cities. Now, luckily, there's a key cities group that we belong to, and it may be quite useful to talk to the team at Wakefield, which oversee the secretariat of the key cities group, because they're basically us. There will still be some variables, some have work in-house, some don't, but that, I think, is the closest comparator to what we've got. At the moment, I don't think we can agree an amended corporate target until we've got an idea of where we're going and what our comparators are saying. From what the stuff you've given us, it's in the middle, which may or may not be helpful, but it might be some work to do with the key cities group to talk through and find out what their average is, and if you can't find it, then we come back here again at the next meeting and work out what to do. That would be my suggestion then.
Thank you, Councillor. I have a kind of follow-on question that's related. So, obviously, I appreciate it being difficult to get data from other authorities. I kind of thought that when we asked you to do it, but we did get some data from Brighton Hove and Southampton. Do we know what their target is? So we know what their averages are, but do we know what their in-house target is?
No, when we asked the question, they didn't. That's how they responded. They didn't respond that they had a target. We can go back and clarify that, because I'm working quite closely with someone at Southampton on the back of this piece of work, but not every organisation sets a target.
Yeah. Yep, go on, Councillor.
Only from something that Darren said, which brings up a point, doesn't it, which is about the coronavirus, because there's been some, I believe, I haven't been following it all that closely, some announcement by the government in terms of sick pay, and that sick pay be payable from day 1 rather than day 4 or whatever it is. Does that have any implications here, and is there going to be any specific recording of any absences which are for that cause?
In terms of the payment, that's in relation to statutory sick pay, so that would have minimal impact on us because we've got contractual sick pay. In terms of the recording, yes, what we've asked for are 3 new categories to be set up on the EBS system, the recording system, and that's to have isolation working from home, isolation unable to work from home because it depends largely on the job that the person does, and then coronavirus as the actual reason for absence, so if people then progress into being sick because of the coronavirus, and we are utilising those categories already.
Thank you. Depending on how the national and global picture develops, I suspect we'll probably want some sort of report come next employment committee, just as an overview.
That hence why we've set the categories that we thought somebody would ask at some point.
Okay.
Sorry, we will also be required to report nationally on that as well. So yes, of course.
Okay. Colleagues, I think Councillor Sanders has kind of said where he stands in terms of the targets. Do we have any other thoughts about whether we should A, keep 7 days, B, go with the average, C, a different number, or D, I don't know, I suppose D would be scrap the target, but any thoughts? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's, Darren is right that now is premature to set a target. However, obviously the message still needs to go through to management that the ideal number is 0, and that whatever target we set, we still like to see the numbers go down anyway. And we need to, push for occupational therapy and everything else to minimise unnecessary sickness.
Colleagues, professional colleagues, what do you feel the impact of having the target is, other than for reporting purposes? And if it is purely for our benefit, then...
In my experience, having a target creates some unintended consequences where, depending on the culture and environment of the team working, there can be perceptions of, marvellous, I'm going to take my entitlement of up to X number of days sick, and it can create that mindset. A more healthy approach, or one that I've seen work better, is not to have a target, but to have a focus on increasing attendance rather than minimising absence. And so focusing our efforts on preventing people being sick and focusing on them actually being at work through wellbeing initiatives. So those in recent years have proved to have a more beneficial effect on people actually attending work than having a target to say we should bring absence down. So focus on attendance rather than having a target which people will go, that's my entitlement.
So the impression I get is that you're not going to fight us if we were to suddenly decide that there's no point having it. Because I think that's how I felt at the last meeting, and hence asked the question in the first place. Colleagues? I think we've got a suggestion from Councillor Sanders that says keep 7 days, and I think I'm going to suggest we don't have any days, or indeed 0 days. But I'm open to other thoughts. I think Councillor Stubbs has kind of put his point of view across. Others? Yes, Councillor Stagg?
This is going back to my teaching days now. What about rewards for people who have 100% attendance in some shape or form? It's the carrot rather than the stick.
And do we? I know we can get some gold stickers.
Yeah, we have badges. The difficulty that we've had when we've discussed schemes like that previously with our workforce and with the trade unions around those people with disabilities and maternity and other reasons why there may be reasons that those people are having absences from work, and it can be quite divisive. We could certainly look at a scheme, and this is the thing we're plugging into public sector colleagues, to see if there's anything that they're doing that achieves that outcome without creating the divide, which is what we're trying to minimise.
Yes. Councillor Sanders?
What should be happening, actually, is pretty much none of what we've suggested. which is actually there should be a full-scale systems intervention into the whole idea around absenteeism and what will encourage people, and then actually work with the people concerned to figure out exactly what the problem is and what will work. I think in the absence of that, and in the absence of any proper comparative information, it seems sensible in the short term to keep the target as it is, recognising that game theory-based targets do not always work, otherwise you wind up with a hospital trolley as a bed. But until we actually have a deeper understanding both of our own employees and also about what else is doing, it seems sensible not to change anything, because if we change anything, then there may be the perverse incentive of, oh, I don't have to worry. And that may be worrying. So I'm proposing no change, but a lot of work in terms of actually understanding both our own employees and what other organisations are doing. And I can reduce that to one line if necessary for the minutes.
Yes, Councillor Corkery.
I think where I'm coming from with this is that if we're going to have a target, it should be the target that is most realistic based on the evidence available to us, which by the sounds of it is the information that's been provided by the LGA.
Except the information is an average. Do we want to be average? You may wish. I joke, but that's, you know, and I think, similar to Councillor Stagg, I have a sort of education background, and by my mind, you're either there or you're not there, and the general default should be that you're there. So I think we've got two suggestions. I'm happy to go with Councillor Sanders on the basis that both the leader and leader of the opposition are not here, and they might have an opinion that maybe makes a difference. My preference would be to go with the scrapping of the target, if I'm totally honest. Okay, right, we've got two suggestions. One is from Councillor Sanders. Does anybody second Councillor Sanders' suggestion, which is keep it to 7 days? Okay, thank you, Luke. My suggestion is to scrap the target altogether and focus on just getting people to work whenever reasonable. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you. Oh, I'll take Councillor Symes, thank you. Okay, so I think that's a straightforward vote. Yeah, well, do I have to do one and the other, or can I do one versus the other? Okay, you were first, Councillor Sanders, so all in favour of Councillor Sanders' idea of keeping the 7 days? All against keeping the 7 days? Wonderful. All in favour of, so for the record, that's 2 for, 4 against. All in favour of scrapping the target? A much larger number. That's 5, and I won't bother asking for the other one. So, wonderful. I think that provides a clear outcome. Any other questions on this topic? No? Okay, wonderful. So I believe that's, so I'll take it one by one. So I think we've agreed the corporate target, and that is that there isn't a target, and presumably we are happy with monitoring sickness and noting the wellbeing activities. Anything anybody wants to say? No? Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. That was quite an interesting discussion overall. Item 5, Foundation Living Wage. Rochelle.
Hopefully this will be slightly easier.
I might get told off by the leader later, but oh well.
Okay. So Foundation Living Wage, so this is the paper that we're asked to bring back to the committee annually, so upon request. The Foundation Living Wage increases in April, and it will be increasing from the current value of £9 to £9.30 per hour. The difference this year is we would ordinarily know what the normal cost of living rise for the employer would be, and that would be applied in April at the same time, so we would have both figures. Because of the general election, because of Brexit, and because of everything else that's been going on, that's going to be delayed. So that's just to set the context for you. So at the moment, based on existing figures, there would be around 300 staff who would be impacted by the increase in the Foundation Living Wage if members chose to continue to apply that. The cost to the organisation, based on our current figures, would be around £32,000. However, if come April or later on in the year, and backdated to April, we receive a 2% increase in the cost of living, which is what we're budgeting for. We don't yet know because we've not negotiated that. That figure would reduce significantly down to around £8,000. So for members to decide if we want to continue to pay the foundation living wage. This would, of course, also apply to transferred in staff, GP staff and our agency workers, as agreed at the last committee.
Given that items 5 and 6 are fairly interlinked, can I suggest we have the discussion as one? Any objections to that? So item 5 is foundation living wage, item 6 is the pay policy statement where we actually set whether or not we're going to do the living wage. So I would suggest we just have a discussion across both items if people are happy with that. Rochelle, did you want to say anything in addition then in relation to item 6 before we...
Happy to, if that's how members want to proceed. So the pay policy statement is a statutory report the council are required to publish under the Localism Act. It needs to be a full council decision and it needs to be published by the end of the month. We are obviously delayed. We would normally bring it in December, but we weren't able to have a committee. The policy statement, as Councillor mentioned, is a forward-looking report, so for 2020-2021. No other significant changes in there other than the foundation living wage, which we need to make a decision on and we either need to remove or include before we publish.
Okay. Members, questions or comments? Councillor Corkery and then Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you. Firstly, in terms of the living wage and the impact on 2P'd in staff, so I'm correct in thinking that we're continuing with the practice of providing them with a one-off payment as opposed to subsuming it into their general wage. Is that correct?
It's not a one-off payment. It's split into 12 months. It's non-consolidated because their pay is transferred over with them, so we can't change the terms and conditions. We pay it as a top-up as opposed to our own staff. We just increase the bottom of our own salary scales. So it won't be one-off lump sum in a year. It will be divided equally into 12 equal instalments.
And to follow up on that, does that have any implications for their holiday pay and sick pay?
No. So holiday pay is linked to what your earnings are as an average, so what your normal earnings are, which is why it's divided over the 12 equal instalments. So if they take holiday, they will be paid the same when they're on holiday as they would be if they're at work. And in terms of sickness, it will depend what their contractual terms are, if I'm completely honest, with transferred staff. But if they're entitled to be paid for sickness, that will be whatever a normal week is for that individual.
Okay, thank you. I've got some follow-up questions. In terms of outsourced staff, so I'm correct in thinking that the kind of report before us doesn't have any impact necessarily on outsourced staff, and if that is correct, what knowledge do we have about how our contractors pay their staff, if any at all, and whether they pay living wage?
You're correct, this report wouldn't apply to any outsourced services because they wouldn't be our staff. In terms of data, I don't have data on what our are you thinking of staff that have transferred under TUPE or people that we contract with?
I'm thinking of people that work in council services that have been contracted out by the local authority.
Via TUPE?
Not necessarily. No, they could have always been provided by the private sector, but they're... Pardon?
So just anyone that provides a service to
I mean, the obvious example for me, home care contractors contracted by adult social care to provide a council service, but employed by a private company.
Yeah, so we don't have details on what they're paid, and this report certainly wouldn't be covering those. I believe there's an accreditation scheme that you can look for. There at least was previously when we looked at this, and that would involve applying this to contractors. That's not something that the organisation has sought to do previously. So only our own internal workforce.
So that was where I was coming from really in terms of becoming an accredited living wage employer, because part of the condition on that is that you do look at who you're contracting with and what their employment conditions are, and I think that is something that we should be doing as a local authority. Classic example, one of the reasons that particularly in my mind is one of my constituents living in social housing in Somerstown works for one of these companies that adult social care contract to provide home care. Awful employment conditions. You wouldn't believe it. She only gets paid when she's actually at the appointment. The basic wage is the minimum wage, but that's only when she's there. So in reality, it works out to maybe £3 or £4 an hour. They told her that she doesn't get holiday pay for the first year, because that's just how it is. Everyone just accepted it. We challenged it. They turned around and said, well, okay, yeah, maybe we got that wrong. Really dodgy over sick pay, hardly ever want to play it. These are the conditions that are being provided to our constituents who are working in council services but being ripped off by private companies. So I feel quite strongly that we, as a local authority, we should be moving towards becoming an accredited living wage employer. And what I'd like to propose today is that in the decision that we make, we ask for a report to be brought to the next meeting about how we can become an accredited living wage employer.
Okay. I think in principle I'd agree. Has any work happened in terms of looking at what that would mean for our internal processes in terms of contracting and going out to tender, etc., etc.?
Many years ago, not in recent
not
times, but
recent.
Natasha may have experience elsewhere.
No, I'm not aware of any work underway at the moment. I mean, it would really be a issue for procurement initially, and how we would build in that aspect of social value into our procurement rules. We do already build in other aspects of social value around sort of the climate agenda and things like that. But it's certainly something that we could look into in terms of what those conditions are of becoming a living wage foundation employer. But the other thing I would say is that, whatever the current terms and conditions are of internal staff, if they are to be transferred to an outside provider, then their terms and conditions of employment would be protected. So in terms of they would remain on council terms and conditions, it would only be somebody who a private organisation employed directly where those terms and conditions would not apply. So there is some element of protection when staff TUPE transfer out of the council to the private sector, but not otherwise. So whilst we can bring something back, it's more of a procurement issue than an employment issue. I just wanted to give that caveat.
Yeah, and presumably any decision in relation to that sits with the cabinet member. Yeah. Okay. We'll take a vote on your recommendation, Councillor, towards the end of the discussion, if that's okay. Councillor Stubbs.
Firstly, just to follow out of that, I mean, if you think the spend on domiciliary care, I don't know what it is now, I know what it was in 17-18, it was about £5 million, and it's a number which has been...
What would you like me to convert 5 million?
It's a number that has been rising, rising partly through increases in the national living wage, and also partly because the demand for domiciliary care services is rising significantly. So I suspect that £5 million, personally, I think it would probably be over 6 by now. So if you're talking suddenly about, well, let's stick everyone on the national living wage, we're talking here about the fat end of £1 million on the council's bills, just on that. So this is not a small number, and I don't know all the details of the budgets these days. I don't know if you think you've got £1 million sitting there waiting to be spent. Maybe you do think that, but I was pointing out this is serious numbers, and to increase spending at that rate would have an effect on the services that could be afforded. When this policy came in the first place, there was a great deal of discussion about schools. And a lot of that related back to legalities as well, about equal pay claims and so on. Well, we've got figures here on page 34, which show that of the 328 employees affected by the national living wage, 295 of them are in schools. And I'm a little confused by that. I mean, are schools actually paying this? Because schools make their own financial decisions, so presumably whatever policy is passed here does not apply to them, and therefore it's effectively noting that the number of employees actually affected by this is 328 less 295. Am I reading that the right way?
You're reading it the right way, and yes, the majority of schools, if not all, I think last year did apply the foundation living wage, but you're correct that they don't have to, it is local decisions, but the maintained schools, yes, they did, and we don't envisage that changing for this year round.
Yeah, so it's outcome through pressure rather than you have to do this. Okay, wonderful. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. In the context of social care, clearly there's going to be a government drive to try and sort out the social care service. And clearly one of the issues there is the 15-minute visits, as well as the lack of pay that's involved. One of the issues we've faced as a council is that when we've been encouraged to put up council tax in order to pay for social care, much of it's gone on wages in the first 2 years because of the increases in the national living wage. By having the real living wage, it sends out the right signals. We've had reports to this committee before about how it reduces days off, about how it improves sickness, it reduces sickness, both physical and mental, because you are secure. Also about how much money it puts into the economy. So having as many people on the foundation living wage as possible is very, very good news. The other thing is that the 2% that the council has put in, has basically budgeted for, is the employer offer to the unions. So therefore the cost for the City Council of, you've said £8,000, Michelle, in the updated papers from the Director of Finance we've got 6,622, so I'm assuming one of those is right, but I would be more than happy as one of the portfolio holders to absorb my share of that, or my team's share of that, because it is a good thing to do. And certainly I do encourage contractors to make sure they pay the real living wage, because I think that's important. And also one of the reasons why we're bringing care in-house at Ian Gibson Court, which is working so well, is because we're fully aware of the sort of companies that Cal has mentioned from other councils. So a lot of work is being done on that, but we have to have social care sorted as a whole, and no party's bothered to do that for years. I hope the current government will. But pay and conditions has to form part of that national package, and I hope that will be done when Brexit is done.
Any other comments or questions, colleagues, before we take over?
I've got
yeah.
queries about,
go
about the next report, or the one that we're taking with this pay policy.
Yeah.
Just bear with me, I'll find my notes. Right, okay, yeah. So, one of the queries I have is around market supplements, and I've been provided with some information on this previously. It was just a query really, whether that's information is contained about that within the pay policy, or how that kind of fits into it, whether that's something that happens outside.
Yeah, sorry, I was just looking what section it is. I believe it's section 4. Sorry, it doesn't go into individual detail in terms of the whole entire workforce, because the report predominantly looks at higher wages and the ratio between the highest and median earners, but in terms of the overall common practices to all employees, it's in section 4.
I think that would potentially be something that would be useful to be brought back to Future Employment Committee around the use of market supplements, just as something that is being reported and can then be monitored.
Okay. Could you go into a little bit more detail about how you'd like that? Just because we keep having discussions about data, and then we ask for a report, and then it's not quite the right data, and we go. So just it's a bit more specific.
So I appreciate there's potentially some issues around I've been able to identify individuals. So I would have thought it would be possible to report the total number of individuals receiving a market supplement payment, and the total costs of those market supplement payments, and also maybe some parameters in terms of the lowest and the highest amount paid, but that might be a bit more questionable in terms of data.
How possible is that?
It's certainly possible to produce. I think the question would be what we would be planning to do with that data once we had it, would be my only question.
Okay, well, for me it would be a monitoring exercise, so if that suddenly jumped up, then that would be something the Employment Committee should be aware of, and would potentially want to look into.
I'm happy for something to be produced, but I'd want to make sure it includes reasoning about use of them, because they're used for slightly different reasons in different circumstances, and I could see how colleagues in the media could report that in a particular way, when actually it might be doing the exact opposite. For example, I know that we've used market supplements in planning previously, and that's mainly been to make up for the fact that they're all massively underpaid in comparison to the national average. So personally, I think that would be a really positive thing, but I can see how that could accidentally be reported as council handing out lots of money kind of thing. So I would just be cautious about that.
So if I could add to that, I think we can absolutely do it, but I think I would be wary of presenting you with any data without explaining why the market supplements actually exist in the first place. We do have quite a variety of roles where our pay structure is very far adrift of the market, and that impacts on our ability to actually recruit any kind of staff, let alone high calibre staff. And so, whilst we can present a report and you will see the variety of types of roles and reasons why the market supplements are applied, it may also then prompt a further discussion around actually the pay structure that we operate, which is a whole other conversation. But you might consider it one that needs to be had. Reflecting
is that
our
conversation
ability.
more in person than just looking at supplements then?
It's I'm just saying, I suppose a little bit of careful what you wish for, because it raises all sorts of other questions, and it might be something that may qualify as an exempt report as well, given the nature of it. But I'll speak to Peter about that once we've got some data that we're able to share with you.
When was the last time we did a kind of wholesale restructure of our pay structure?
Many years ago.
Yeah, with,
10 at least 10 years ago. At least 10 years ago. Yeah. But officers do monitor market supplements on a regular basis. We have a monthly, what's called a pay steering group, when we monitor these.
Okay. And who has overall responsibility for the pay structure? Does it sit with Cabinet, the Cabinet member, directors, the Chief Exec, us?
Head of Paid Service.
Okay, fine. Wonderful. Given the conversation, Councillor Corkery, do you still want a paper on pay supplements?
I think so, yeah, because if it turns out that we've got a significant number of people that are being paid out of kilter with the pay structure, then there's something wrong with the pay structure that needs to be addressed.
But then would you rather something on the pay structure rather than simply on supplements?
Both, potentially, but I think that the supplements is interesting because that tells us whether we think there's an issue, but we need to have that information. I know I've been provided with it confidentially, but I think that's something the committee would benefit from seeing also.
Okay, step by step, please could we, unless anybody has a considerable objection to it, could we have a paper in context on the use of pay supplements at Portsmouth City Council? Okay, I've forgotten what your other thing is now. Accreditation. So a report outlining the process and steps required in order to meet that accreditation as a kind of first step towards it, even though the majority of the decisions would then have to be taken by relevant Cabinet members and the Chief Exec. Is that yes? So any seconders for that proposal? Well, I'll second it. I agree with the living wage. Yes?
I'd be happy to have the report, but I also think we then need to look at costs as well.
Well, I think that's the point of the report. Yeah.
It just wasn't clear from the discussion that there would be costs included. So if there is, that's lovely.
Well, I think the point is that when it comes to making decisions about the financial implications, those decisions don't lie with the Employment Committee, they lie with, well, other people, whether it's Cabinet members or Head of Paid Service or whoever. So for us, it would just be about understanding the process in order to trigger that going forward. Is that looking at our constitutional people? Yeah? We got the nod. So any all for that? Wonderful. All against? Abstentions? Well, it's passed, Councillor, so you're okay. So could we have that? Is that clear? Yeah. So just the process required, and okay, wonderful. So that takes us to the recommendations on the agendas. Are we all happy with recommendations 5I? So to note what the living wage is. I'm going to take silence as acceptance. Wonderful. 5.2, note the effect. Wonderful. Oh, sorry, agenda item 5, recommendation 2. Yeah, sorry. So noting the effect of the National Wage Award, and therefore, based on current information, spinal column points 1 and 2 is lower than the foundation living wage, because we don't know the impact coming in yet, as was explained. Yeah, okay, silence, wonderful. And agenda item 5, recommendation 3, the continual reporting of the National Foundation living wage on an annual basis. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So that takes us to the recommendations for item 6. Recommendation 1, that we approve the pay policy statement attached. And item 2, that we approve the inclusion of the foundation living wage, given that we've just accepted it. Okay, I think that's all passed. Isn't democracy wonderful, everyone? Anyway, item 7, employee opinion survey. Natasha.
That's me, thank you. Yeah, so we just wanted to report back to the committee on the results of the employee opinion survey. It was undertaken in the summer of last year. And again, as with other reports, we would have reported back earlier, but obviously there wasn't an employment committee between then and now when we've had the results. So the council has undertaken employment opinion surveys for the last 10 years, and some of the recommendations here are around actually that I will be reviewing what we do with the survey. But essentially the findings of the recent survey, roughly half of the organisation participated in the survey in terms of responding to it. By and large, of the responses, there's been some improvements in some key areas, particularly response rates in some directorates, but also things like staff reporting pride in working for the City Council, people understanding the aims of the City Council and how they contribute to it, and things like ability to access the right learning and development for people to do their jobs. There were slight decreases in some key areas that we should be noting around staff believing their work makes a positive difference, which is a bit at odds with actually feeling pride in working for the City Council. So that suggests there might be something a bit of work to do in terms of helping people understand where their work fits in and how what they do contributes to delivering the council's priorities. But positively, staff feel more positive about their work-life balance. So I think there's a lot in there that is very, very positive to reflect on. But there are, I think for me, some gaps in what we're doing, because we are still only reporting an improvement for half of the workforce. And so what is the other half of the workforce thinking, feeling, doing? Because that's not actually reported. And of course, participation in a survey doesn't necessarily mean that people are engaged. It just means that they're filling in a form on one particular day, and I might fill that form in tomorrow and answer it completely differently. So in terms of going forward, whilst the response rate isn't bad, it's only very much a snapshot in time, and we don't actually report corporately on what's happening and what we're doing as a cross-cutting organisation, because what we're doing is each directorate is tasked with developing their own action plans, and so responses like the council doesn't manage change effectively, and responses which were the lowest levels of response rates around the council listens and responds to the views of staff were the two lowest levels of agreement. Those are the kinds of things where we could be taking a more strategic overview and actions to address some of those issues. So going forward, what I'm proposing is that we look at the survey design, because what we have seen is the survey design can impact on the response rate. So the longer the survey, the less likely people are to complete it. So we've got, in total, if you answered all of the questions, you'd be answering about 66 questions in this survey. And what I've seen is that after question 33, there's definitely a tail off of people answering. So we're not actually getting a full picture. We also don't look at our engagement levels. So now engagement levels are something that will tell us the extent to which people are motivated to do their work, are committed to the objectives of the organisation, and increase their sort of discretionary effort in doing their jobs. And there is a body of evidence that shows that the higher the level of engagement, the more productive the workforce is. It also shows the evidence that the more engaged staff are, the more they are at work and the less sickness absence they take, the better the customer feedback and the customer outcomes from that workforce. And because we don't measure engagement, we don't have any idea of the extent to which our workforce is engaged or not. So I'm going to introduce engagement scoring as part of our staff survey, and we'll aim to do that at a corporate level as well as at a directorate level, so we can see what levels of motivation staff actually have, and that will be an interesting score to look at and correlate it against our sickness absence levels, our turnover rate, etc. What else? I've covered that. The other thing that we don't do is understand, again I was talking about workforce profile, is understand the workforce profile in relation to the survey responses. So we don't capture any information around protected characteristics as part of the survey. So we ask staff if they have a disability, and we ask staff if they have a caring responsibility, but not any other protected characteristics. So when looking at the survey and the types of responses that staff are giving, we're not able to then take any actions that might address some issues around protected characteristics. Now what we do know is that staff, we have very low reporting of protected characteristics amongst our staff. So people are not typically declaring if they have a disability, what their religion or religious belief is, or their gender, etc. So this is another opportunity to gather data. It would be anonymous, but it would give us a snapshot of the makeup of our workforce and ability to then start to develop some actions and targeted actions around what we may need to do to recruit and retain a broader diversity of the workforce. So those are the changes that I'm planning on introducing, and I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions.
I'm going to be selfish and go first, if that's okay, colleagues, and then I'll go to Councillor Corcoran and Councillor Stagg. So just so I kind of fully understand it, and then depending on whether I understood or not, I have a follow-up question. So both as it stands and thinking about going forward, how transparent are the directorate level action plans that get created and then in theory implemented? So if I am, the most junior member of staff, do I get to see that action plan and the impact, and how is that measured, and how open and transparent is the publication of the results?
So the full council results are published on the intranet, so all staff can see those. I don't know the answer to the first question in terms of how transparent are the action plans at a directorate level. I can only speak for my directorate, where each of the areas of my directorate have undertaken sessions with their staff at a whole team level, where they've shared the directorate, not only the directorate but also the team responses, and then co-produced the action plan. So there's full visibility and full engagement in development of the action plan. Because we don't require directorates to report back centrally on those action plans, nor on the impact of those action plans, I can't tell you what that is and how transparent they are. But again, that's something that I'm intending to change going forward, so that we have a proper mechanism to understand what is being done, what impact it's having, and whether we need to adjust or do anything differently.
Okay, and when you say you have the intention to change it, is that written anywhere, or do we need to write it in?
No, it's contained in the body of the report.
Is it?
Yes.
Which bits?
So
that's why I wasn't sure.
So future surveys, section 7 onwards.
Yeah, I'm there.
So.
And where's the bit about reporting back and etc.?
Oh, I may not have included that in there, for which my apologies.
Okay.
It was in my head, I forgot to put it on the paper.
Okay, fine.
Sorry.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Colleagues, I think Councillor Corker is first.
Thank you. Section 512, so it talks about the greatest reduction and positive response being for the question, I have the opportunity to work flexibly in my role. Do we know why that is? Have there been some kind of changes that have led to that reduction?
We don't know specifically why that is. Some of that, there could be a number of different causes. Some of that might be attitude of managers. Some of that could be technology to support greater flexible working. But it is something that I'm actually discussing with directors next week, because as we develop our technology estate, we will over time be introducing different technology that will increase the ability of staff to work more flexibly, which will also hopefully help with some of the sickness absence, because the more flexibly staff can work, again, there is a correlation between flexible working, a greater agility and reduction in sickness absence levels.
Councillor Stagg.
Yes, I've got a few questions. In the summary of survey findings, is this percentage of the whole council? It's not by directorates?
That's right, whole council of those that responded to the survey, yes.
Well, my concern, query, I suppose, is it's got, up 9.77% or down 2. What percent? That's a percentage of how many people? If it's a small number of people in a directorate, it's a small number of people, whereas if it's a larger directorate, that is more worrying or more pleasing. But if we know what it is directorate by directorate, we can work out where there are problems and then how to address them individually, yes?
Yes, that's correct. So these reflect the whole council response. Each director has that level of detail for their own directorate, so they can see what that actually means in their own specific area. So as an example, I've separated out finance and IT's results, and so in the appendix you'll see that there was a significant reduction in the response rate for finance and information services. When splitting that out between finance and IT, I could see that it wasn't actually a significant reduction in response rates for finance, it related to IT specifically. So I'm taking actions within IT to address that.
In 6.2, it says there is currently no overarching strategic action plan that addresses the issues. Is there going to be an action plan?
Yes, I think that's responding to the point that the Chair made. So that's one of the things that I'm going to do going forward is looking at this cross-council to put something in place.
And finally, there's nothing in here, and this is one of my beat in my bond, I suppose. There's nothing in there about how do we show that we value staff?
So again, that relates to feedback loops. And one of the things that is in here is the question that had a very low response rate of the council listens and responds to staff feedback. So one of the things that we need to get better at is demonstrating to staff that we've taken their views on board. One of the factors of low participation in staff surveys is if people don't believe that what they say and what they feed back is going to be listened to and acted upon, they won't participate. So it's a very key thing in terms of making staff feel valued, because if they feel heard, they feel valued. So that's one of those areas. And there are other things that we are looking towards doing, which is creating a set of organisational values. So those are the sorts of things where we can set behavioural expectations, both of our staff but also of our managers and leaders, around how we not only expect staff to behave but also how we value each other's contributions in the workplace. So those are things that we're taking forward. Transport have already developed a values framework that they're now actively deploying.
It's a very good directorate.
As are adult services, and I'm discussing with the directors next week, broadening that work out across the whole council, because it's one of those fundamentals, if you like, that strengthens the relationship between employer and employee and makes staff feel they have a role to play.
Anyone else? Okay. I was going to add a recommendation, but actually I think it'll be in the minutes of the conversation and it's recorded and everything else, so I'm happy with the undertaking that what you said is what will happen. Agenda item 7, recommendation 1, note the findings of the survey. Are we all happy with that? Wonderful. Note the actions being undertaken. Yes. Note the actions being taken for the future. Wonderful. So they're all approved as written. Item 8, gender pay gap.
Thank you. So as members will be aware, the gender pay gap reporting regulations came into force in March 2017. This report needs to be published by the end of the month. Again, we would ordinarily bring it to you in December. We weren't able to. Employees in the public sector are subject to the public sector equality duty and must have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination and advance equality. So this is just one of the measures that Portsmouth City Council produces to meet that target. The purpose of the report is to achieve greater gender equality across the UK and increase transparency. So it's not something specific or local to us as an employer. We contribute to a much bigger national picture. So I think that's something important to remember in terms of our local reporting. Just a few statistics to draw your attention to in terms of context of the report. The City Council is made up of 70% female workers, 30% male. So in terms of the context of the report, that impacts on the data. 79% of men are in full-time role compared to 2% of female workers. Upon the request of members, the last time we brought this to committee, which would have been a year ago, we have broken down the age ranges in line with the ONS data. I believe that was Councillor Stubbs' request. And so you can see the summary of that, which gives you a clearer indication of what's happening in each age bracket across the organisation. Where you see a negative figure, that means on average females are earning more than male comparators within that age bracket. So the data's there for you to view. In terms of the action plan and in terms of feedback from members at the last committee, we are obviously focusing on the gender pay gap where one exists within our organisation, but our action plan is actually more broadly focused on eliminating discrimination, unconscious bias and across all protected characteristics. So some of the recommendations in the action plan will not only look at the gender but look across the entire board, because that's the direction of travel with all reporting, and that's something that and Natasha has brought in since she's been appointed. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Stagg.
On page 71, 3.3.7, where you've got the table of the differences in the gap between male and female, notice that for full-time women, 22 to 29, the gap is very, very small, obviously. It's the other way around, am I right? Because it's a minus figure.
The minus figure would indicate
Yes.
that females earn more in that age bracket.
So now, is that because the women are better qualified, or is it just an overreaction or a greater reaction to the fact that there was a pay gap, significant pay gap?
It would be difficult for me to answer that in terms of Councillor Stubbs will no doubt mention the university any minute now, so I'll probably leave that to Councillor Stubbs.
Councillor Stubbs, you have a point to make. We can do it together if you.
Sorry, in terms of questions, so on your action plan on page 92, now bearing in mind, as you said, we've got a 70% female workforce. Not only that, but we've also got for all the ages in the 20s, 30s and 40s, women being paid more than men. Why do we have a recommendation which is to continue to find ways to maximise the number of female applicants? Surely it should be to maximise the number of male applicants.
In some areas we do have a gender pay gap in the top areas of our organisation, so those are the areas that we would try to attract more female candidates. So it's not just male. I think in reality we are looking to increase our diversity as a whole organisation, so I think all of our measures would be looking at advertising our roles to the widest group of population. Obviously, we have to have an action plan for the gender pay gap report, but in reality, we are looking at becoming a more inclusive employer across the board as opposed to just...
But you are saying that you are going to go out of your way to recruit and female applicants in ahead of male applicants. That's basically what that says. Otherwise, there's no need to say it. Ahead of male applicants with equal qualifications, even though we have a largely female workforce, and even though, particularly for the ages that we're recruiting at, and the recruitment is largely going to be into the younger age ranges, women are paid more than men. How do you justify that?
We're certainly not looking to take positive action. Okay.
But to be clear, this point is about applicants, not appointments.
The only point I would add to that is the types of mechanism we're doing, which is what Natasha touched on earlier, is looking at the flexibility of our workforce. We do know that it is still difficult for predominantly women to work full-time after returning after childcare. That's not in all cases, that's some cases. So where we can provide more flexible, agile working, we're not just potentially increasing the number of female applicants, we're potentially increasing the pool of applicants across the board, and that could be in relation to disability, that could be ethnicity, that could be a whole wide range of things. If you would prefer that statement to be taken out or adjusted, we can do so, but we're definitely not taking positive action.
Perhaps something that reflects the outcome but focuses on equality or broadening of. Wonderful. Councillor Sanders.
I think the picture is a bit more muddied than Councillor Stubbs suggests. I look at the key findings in 3.6, and it says that the mean, and this is the difference between mean and median. I was expecting standard deviations and for the full house of statistical smoothing, but we'll take the mean because that seems a little bit closer to what people would normally understand. So the average gender pay gap in the organisation is 9.57% across the piece. We know from the work we looked at earlier that we got lots of people who were older than normal in the organisation. It's disproportionately old. But then we get to this wonderful thing called the bonus pay gap. And then we find out, and I don't know quite how this works, so someone will tell me, that 46 men got a bonus in the organisation, and 118 women got bonus in the organisation. And the median bonus pay gap, in other words, where halfway lies, is a total of 30.75%, which I'm assuming is based on total cash handed out, which if it's handed out to 2.5 times more women than men is something I would expect. How much of that really large gap in terms of bonuses affects the figures that Luke has just been on about? Does it? I assume it does.
In terms of bonus, just for clarity, obviously the City Council doesn't have a traditional mechanism around bonuses. This is in relation to honorariums in terms of linking it back to the pay policy statement that we just had. So it would be honorariums. In terms of what the question, linking it to Luke's point around not having a gap.
Yeah, I mean, there is one. I mean, that much is clear. There are certain issues amongst certain age groups in the organisation which is interesting and I think does need some additional work. But we can't be strident about this because the picture isn't strident. The picture is much more nuanced. We have a disproportionately old workforce that is disproportionately female and disproportionately part-time. That's not great news. We need certainly to have more senior female in the organisation, and we've now got another interim director who is female, which was not the case here. Here's the current interim director of public health. That's good news. But it seems to me that there is a pay gap that we need to pursue. There are particular issues in certain ages, which may or may not be linked to the massive bonuses that have been given out. So I think I would suggest that we just accept the recommendations of this report, but look at maybe some more work as to why particularly in the between 22 and 39, there is that reverse pay gap but because there is a reverse pay gap amongst a relatively small number of people, that doesn't negate the wider pay gap amongst a larger number of people, which this report hands out. So I don't think this is male bashing as a report, and I don't think that's the intention. I don't think that's where you're suggesting. We're trying to rectify a problem. We seem to have found a bit of another one, and that also needs to be pursued. But I think to turn around and say that what's being done is male bashing is not fair or accurate or borne out by the evidence.
Councillor Stubbs. Well, I'm very happy to have a free flow of questions and comments as people feel appropriate.
Well, I'll make my comment. I mean, firstly, I would like to see that line action plan item 13 reworded. As it is, I think it is absolutely inappropriate, and I'll vote against the whole thing if that's not going to be changed.
Just to clarify, are you happy with officers saying they'll do it, or do you want a recommendation that says to do it?
Well, I want something that's balanced in there.
But and I think officers have committed to doing that. But are you happy with that, or do you want us to do it as an additional recommendation?
Look, I recognise that it almost doesn't matter in terms of what it would change, whatever the wording says. But so in that sense, I will accept I think the way you're going with this, and let officers make the amendment. But I think we've got, certainly what I think about it, and I think I've had, I'm not sure if I had some sort of support from the committee for this or not, but at least not clear-cut opposition on that. I mean, on this, and as for the rest of the council report, I think it's fairly sort of innocuous, and I recognise that the government requires you to do this. But I want to make some points really about the policy as a whole from a national level outside of the context of this local authority, because the whole thing really is based upon trying to create a fake narrative of victimhood. Across the economy as a whole, it is a fact that in the 20s and 30s, women are paid more than men. Now, you'd never know that from the media narrative. I mean, we had Frances O'Grady say that women work for free for 2 months per year. A complete load of nonsense, and I might add, if she's looking for things to pick up on, she might want to look at the GMB union, where the pay gap is 32%. The whole point is to create a fake narrative of victimhood, and that has real implications in terms of policy that we have in this country now. There's been a lot of pressure on, particularly for starting jobs, for jobs of people in their 20s, to positively discriminate in favour of women, even though women are paid more than men. That in all sorts of industries, like engineering and so forth, women gain a lot of advantages through employment, and none of that's done the other way around. We have, school teachers, so on, primary school teachers, so on, are almost all female. Nothing's done about that. All we get is everything is just loaded against men at every stage. I think it is a hideous policy, and nobody ever speaks out about it. A lot of people know. I mean, if you look at comments on anywhere online, people know this stuff, but no one ever says it because we live in an age of political correctness where you are silenced for saying the truth. But the truth of it is that yes, that men are victims. Men are not treated fairly in today's world. We have, and look at all the things to the left. We have the feminist narrative about, well, it's all about equality. Well, if that was the case, why is nothing done about divorce courts? Why is nothing done about the clear-cut fact that, like for like, women receive lighter sentences through the criminal justice system? Nothing's ever done about that. The whole thing is deeply misleading, and this policy, the way that it's set up, is to create a false narrative and to make the situation worse for men. That's the way it's positioned, and I don't like it at all.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you, Councillor Stubbs. Natasha.
So I just wanted to add something around the workforce profile work that I've got underway. The purpose of doing that is to get a greater level of granularity on our workforce, but also applicants or people who apply for jobs in the council. Now, that's not something that we have recorded for a number of years, so we don't actually know who applies for jobs in the council. So I think are very, very comfortable to think about continuing to attract a greater and more diverse range of applicants once we know what applicants we have, because at the moment we don't know whether they are female or male, or whether we need to attract more of one or the other type of individual. I think just looking around the building at the workforce, it's fair to say we could probably do more to attract those from different ethnic minorities, for example. So there's a range of different things that we could do around, that I want to do around diversity, but the purpose of the workforce profile work is to go and do more detailed analysis around what our workforce looks like and where we want to target some of our actions, not just around gender, but around all protected characteristics, because the population of Portsmouth is very diverse, and surrounding regions, and therefore the market for our workforce is equally diverse. So we need to be doing everything that we can to attract people to come and work in the City Council from that broad range of, a broad range of the labour market, and all characteristics, whether they're male, female, or any other category of how they may have a gender identity, as well as ethnicity, as well as religion, as well as ability or disability, etc. So hopefully that workforce profiling will give us some of the data to enable that analysis to take place, to have more informing of some of our action plans. So I hope that gives you some assurance that work is already underway to address some of those issues.
Thank you, Natasha. And in terms of the gender pay gap reporting that we do to national government, how do we deal with staff that are non-binary or transitioning, or any other category other than male or female?
This is an area that we've reported back last year and this year, asking the government that that's an area that's likely to increase, and we ourselves are in the process of just finalising our gender identity policy for the City Council. At the moment, there is no mechanism for the government to be able to report on categories other than male or female. We, as Natasha said, what we've asked is for that to be broadened, not just around gender or those who identify differently, but also in terms of ethnicity and the broader diversity. So we have to report in this very specific way, because these are the guidelines that are given, but we have already fed back that for our organisation we would like to see those national guidelines change, because we don't feel that it's reflective of all the needs of our city. So in answer to your question, we can't report at the moment. We've spoken to other employers to ask them how they're managing that at the moment, and they've had to exclude the data. We cannot continue to exclude data because they don't fall into the categories that we're being given.
And is that what we currently do, or?
We don't have that situation at the moment.
Okay.
But we've been preempting that for the last couple of years to ask for a solution should we come across that situation. And our new, just to provide some further assurance, our new HR and finance system will be set up in order to be able to manage different criteria moving forward into the future and how we report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stubbs?
That does actually open up an interesting question about privacy as well. So, I mean, for me, if I'm asked to fill in the form on anything and it's got, race or age or so on, I prefer not to say every time, or I draw a line for it because I don't want to help the bean counters. Now, what options do our staff have to do that?
They have that option. They can prefer not to say. And it's not compulsory to complete the questionnaire anyway.
So do they then become data not included in this report? Yeah, okay, wonderful. Any further questions or comments before we get to the recommendations, colleagues? No, okay. Item 8, recommendation 1, notes the key findings of the Gender Pay Gap Report 2019. I'll take silence as acceptance. Wonderful, thank you. And again, agenda item 8, recommendation 2, agree the action plan. Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone. That brings us to the end of our agenda and the end of the meeting. See you all soon.